Why did ancient Egyptians wear eyeliner? Imagine waking up in Thebes more than 3,000 years ago. The sun is already beginning to heat the mud brick walls outside your home. Somewhere in the street, a donkey is complaining. Someone is carrying bread from an oven. Someone else is pouring water into a clay basin. And you are standing in front of a polished bronze mirror. Before you leave the house, you pick up a tiny stick. You dip it into a dark powder. Then, very carefully, you draw a thick black line around your eyes. Not just above them, around them. You extend the line toward your temples until your eyes begin to resemble the painted faces we now associate with ancient Egypt. You might think you're putting on makeup, but if you lived in ancient Egypt, the substance around your eyes could have been doing much more than making you look attractive. It could signal taste, status, cleanliness, protection, religion, and possibly even medicine. In other words, what looks to us like ancient eyeliner was part cosmetic, part cultural symbol, and part attempt to protect one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body. And the strangest part? Some ancient Egyptian eye makeup contained lead. Yes, lead. The same element we now spend enormous effort trying to keep out of paint, water, toys, and cosmetics. So why were people putting it next to their eyes? And were they accidentally doing something medically useful? To answer that, we need to forget Cleopatra for a moment and walk into an ordinary Egyptian home. Because the story of Egyptian eyeliner begins long before Cleopatra ever existed. Beat 1. This wasn't just a fashion trend. When modern people imagine ancient Egypt, there are certain images that appear almost automatically. Pyramids, mummies, golden masks, pharaohs, and those enormous dark eyes. You see them on statues, paintings, coffins, reliefs, and modern movies. The black outline around the eye is so closely connected with ancient Egypt that today we almost treat it like a costume. But to ancient Egyptians, eye paint was not something reserved for a royal photo shoot. Men wore it. Women wore it. And evidence for eye cosmetics appears across a very long span of Egyptian history. Archaeologists have found cosmetic containers, applicator sticks, grinding palettes, and traces of the substances themselves. Some containers were small and practical. Others were beautiful enough to be buried with their owners. That alone tells us something important. These objects were not merely decoration for tombs. Many had been used while their owners were alive. Somebody owned that jar. Somebody used it. Again, and again, and again. The routine may have been surprisingly familiar. Wake up, wash, dress, prepare your hair, apply eye paint, leave the house. Except instead of opening a plastic makeup case, you might grind minerals on a stone palette, mix the powder with liquid or fat, and apply it with a small stick. Ancient Egyptians used both dark and green eye paints. Black eye paint was commonly associated with galena, a lead sulfide mineral, while green pigments could be made from malachite. And already, our modern idea of eyeliner is becoming too simple. Because this wasn't one product. It was a small ancient technology. Beat 2. The little cosmetic lab in your house. Picture an Egyptian household preparing eye paint. On the floor is a small stone palette. Nearby sits a container. A person places mineral material on the palette and begins grinding. Slowly, the rough pieces become powder. That powder can then be mixed into a paste. One mineral gives a dark gray or black appearance. Another produces green. A tiny applicator transfers the mixture to the skin around the eyes. Now think about how strange this is. Thousands of years before cosmetic factories, laboratories, ingredient labels, or pharmacies, people were already selecting minerals based on color and function, grinding them to a usable texture, combining them with other substances, storing them in specially made containers, and applying them with dedicated tools. And Egyptians cared enough about these materials that beautiful cosmetic equipment appears in graves. Some Kohl containers were carved from stone. Others were decorated. Some were designed with separate spaces for different pigments. That tells us eye paint wasn't an afterthought. It was part of the material culture of daily life. Imagine your bathroom cabinet today. Toothpaste, soap, shampoo, deodorant, skin cream, medicine, makeup. Ancient Egyptians obviously did not divide these things into the same neat modern categories. A substance could be beautiful and useful, religious and practical, decorative and medicinal. That distinction is important, because when we ask, was Egyptian eyeliner makeup or medicine, we may be asking the wrong question. To them, it could be both. And once you understand the environment they lived in, the practical side starts making more sense. Beat 3. Imagine living under the Egyptian sun. Step outside. The light is brutal. Sand, pale stone, water, and dry ground reflect brightness back toward your face. You don't have sunglasses. You don't have air conditioning. You don't have a pharmacy full of modern eye drops. And your eyes are exposed every day to dust, wind, insects, smoke, and intense sunlight. Now look again at the dark line around an Egyptian eye. A dark pigment surrounding the eye may have helped reduce some of the uncomfortable glare. That does not mean Kohl was ancient sunscreen in the modern scientific sense. That phrase is catchy, but it oversimplifies things. The more defensible point is this. A dark mineral pigment around the eyes may have made life under harsh sunlight more comfortable. And comfort matters. Imagine working outdoors for hours. Imagine traveling along the Nile. Imagine standing in an exposed field. Imagine trying to concentrate while sunlight reflects directly into your eyes. Suddenly, the dramatic dark eye line does not seem purely decorative anymore. It starts looking practical. But sunlight was only one enemy. Your eyes were also an easy entrance point for infection. And this is where the story becomes much stranger. Beat 4. Your eyes were a medical problem. Today, if your eye becomes red, swollen, painful, or infected, you can visit a doctor. You might receive antibiotic treatment. You might buy sterile eye drops. You might wash your hands with soap and clean water. An ancient Egyptian did not have those options. People lived close to animals. Dust was everywhere. Flies were common. Water sources were shared. Smoke from cooking and lamps irritated the eyes. And eye disease could become a serious problem. Ancient Egyptian medical texts contain numerous treatments for eye conditions. So when Egyptians placed substances around the eye, beauty may not have been the only thing on their minds. Some eye preparations were treated as protective or medicinal substances. This changes the meaning of the morning routine. Imagine someone applying dark eye paint to a child. From our perspective, it might look like a parent putting makeup on that child. From their perspective, the action could also represent care, protection, health, maybe even magical protection at the same time. Ancient Egyptian medicine did not always separate physical treatment from religious belief the way modern medicine tries to. A remedy could contain ingredients, a prayer, a protective symbol, and practical experience, all together. And that mixture of observation and belief is exactly what makes Egyptian daily life so interesting. They were not modern scientists, but they were not simply guessing randomly either. They lived in the same environment generation after generation. They noticed patterns. They experimented. They copied recipes. And some practices survived for centuries. Which brings us to a question that sounds simple but isn't. Who was actually allowed to wear it? Beat 5. Was eyeliner only for rich women? If Hollywood has taught us anything about Egypt, it is apparently that every queen owned a professional makeup artist. But the real picture is much more interesting. Black eye paint was not exclusively female. Ancient Egyptian men wore it too. That immediately breaks one modern assumption. In many cultures today, eyeliner is strongly associated with women's cosmetics. In ancient Egypt, that gender division was far less useful. So imagine walking through an Egyptian community. A woman with dark eye paint would not necessarily attract attention simply because she had makeup on. Neither would a man. The difference between rich and poor may have been more visible in the quality of the objects and materials surrounding the practice. A wealthy person could own finely made containers, polished mirrors, elaborate cosmetic spoons, beautiful jars, and expensive grooming equipment. A poorer household might use much simpler tools. Same basic human desire. Very different bathroom cabinet. This is a pattern we still recognize. A $5 bottle of perfume and a $500 bottle of perfume serve roughly the same basic purpose. But one also communicates wealth. Ancient cosmetic equipment could work in a similar social world. And because people were buried with grooming objects, these possessions could remain connected to identity even after death. But wealth was only part of what people saw when they looked at an Egyptian eye. They may also have seen something divine. Beat 6. Your eyes could connect you to the gods. Look at the famous Eye of Horus. Even if you know almost nothing about Egyptian religion, you've probably seen it. A stylized eye. A strong dark outline. Lines extending beneath and beside it. To an ancient Egyptian, the eye could carry powerful symbolism. The wedjat eye represented the restored eye of Horus. In Egyptian mythology, Horus's eye was damaged and later restored. Because of that story, the symbol became connected with healing, wholeness, regeneration, and protection. People wore wedjat eye amulets. The symbol appeared on objects associated with both life and death. Now compare that shape with the heavily outlined human eye seen throughout Egyptian art. We should be careful here. It would be too simplistic to say that every person putting on Kohl was literally trying to copy Horus. Daily habits rarely have one single explanation. But Egyptian culture clearly gave the eye extraordinary symbolic importance. So when someone framed their own eyes with dark pigment, they lived inside a culture where the eye already meant more than vision. It could mean protection, health, restoration, divine power. Imagine standing in front of your mirror. You are making yourself look good. You are preparing for the sun. You may believe you are protecting yourself from illness. And around your eye, consciously or not, appears a shape deeply familiar from religious imagery. Beauty, medicine, identity, religion, all meeting in one line of black pigment. And now we reach the part that sounds almost impossible, because scientists analyzed ancient Egyptian makeup, and they found something Egyptians should not have been able to make by accident very easily. Beat 7. The lead problem. Lead is toxic. Let's make that clear first. Modern health authorities do not recommend putting lead compounds around your eyes. So this video is not telling you to recreate an ancient Egyptian makeup recipe in your kitchen. Please don't. But ancient Egyptian black eye cosmetics often contained lead-based material, especially galena or lead sulfide. That alone is interesting. Then researchers studying ancient cosmetic samples found additional lead compounds. Two of them were especially fascinating: laurinite and phosgenite. Unlike simple galena taken from mineral deposits, these compounds appear to have been deliberately manufactured in ancient preparations. Think about what that means. Somebody had to know a process, combine materials, control conditions, wait, produce a new substance, and repeat the result. Not modern chemistry, but still a form of chemical craft knowledge. Why spend that effort? Possibly because those substances were believed to help treat the eyes. And this is where a modern laboratory added another piece to the puzzle. Beat 8. The second twist. Researchers tested the biological effect of some of these lead compounds on human skin cells in laboratory conditions. What they observed was surprising. At very low concentrations, certain compounds stimulated the cells to produce more nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is involved in immune signaling. In simple terms, the reaction could potentially help the body's local defenses respond to microorganisms. That raised an extraordinary possibility. Some Egyptian eye preparations containing particular lead salts may actually have produced a biological response relevant to fighting infection. Now, this is the moment where internet history usually goes too far. You may hear a version like this: ancient Egyptians poisoned themselves with lead every day, and the poison made them immune to bacteria. That is not what the research proves. The experiment was conducted under controlled laboratory conditions. It does not prove that every ancient Kohl recipe worked as an antibiotic. It does not prove ancient Egyptians understood nitric oxide. It does not prove regular exposure to lead was harmless. And it definitely does not mean lead is good for you. Lead remains toxic. The interesting possibility is much more subtle. Through generations of practical experimentation, Egyptians may have developed eye preparations that sometimes produced useful effects without knowing the modern chemistry behind them. That is far more fascinating than saying they somehow understood microbiology 3,000 years early. They didn't need to understand molecules. They only needed to notice outcomes. Imagine two recipes. Recipe A looks good. Recipe B looks good, and people believe their eyes feel better afterward. Which recipe survives? Recipe B. Then someone changes it. Someone improves the texture. Someone alters the preparation. Someone passes the method to another person. Centuries later, the chemical process is still being used. This is how practical knowledge can develop before anyone understands the mechanism. Beat 9. What that black line really meant. Go back to the morning in Thebes. You are still standing in front of the bronze mirror. The room is warm. Sunlight is entering through the doorway. The small cosmetic jar is open beside you. You lift the applicator one final time and extend the dark line at the corner of your eye. Now we understand what might be happening in that one ordinary moment. You are changing your appearance. Maybe because you want to look attractive. Maybe because everyone around you considers properly groomed eyes part of being presentable. You may be using a pigment that helps with harsh glare. You may believe it protects your eyes. You may have inherited the recipe from people who had used similar mixtures for generations. Your expensive container might quietly communicate status. And the eye you are outlining exists in a culture where the eye of Horus represents healing and protection. One action, many meanings. That's what makes ancient daily life so much more interesting than lists of kings and battles. The most revealing pieces of history are sometimes tiny. A comb, a toilet, a perfume jar, a piece of linen, a cosmetic stick. Because those objects tell us what people actually did when nobody was building a pyramid. They worried about looking good. They worried about getting sick. They worried about the sun. They wanted protection. They wanted status. They wanted to feel clean and presentable. In other words, they were people, different world, same human problems. And that is perhaps the biggest secret hidden inside ancient Egyptian eyeliner. The surprising part isn't that people 3,000 years ago wore makeup. It's how many problems they tried to solve with the same tiny jar. Beauty, comfort, health, status, religion, all in one. So here's the question. Knowing that traditional Egyptian eye paint could contain lead, would you put it around your eyes every morning? Or would you rather take your chances with the sun, dust, and infections of ancient Egypt? Because if that choice sounds uncomfortable, wait until you find out what happened when an ancient Egyptian needed to use the bathroom. There was no flush button, no toilet paper, and depending on how wealthy you were, there might not even be a toilet. That's the next secret of ancient Egyptian daily life.